All right, so good evening. Thank you for coming to the August Board of Education meeting. Hope you all had a wonderful summer. Our administration and staff have been busy preparing for the new school year. We look forward to welcoming all students on the first day of school next week. And with that, can everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. And the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of meeting July 6, 2023 and July 25th, 2023. May I have a motion, please? Ms. Abramson, seconded by Mr. Rotolo. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Dr. Rufo, may we have the Treasurer's report and appropriation adjustments?
Thank you. The cash on hand for the month end June 2023 was $77,771,178.16. All bank balances for all cash accounts were reconciled to the book balances and were collateralized in accordance with the district's banking agreements and investment policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rufo. May I have a motion to accept the Treasurer's report? Ms. Falco, seconded by Mr. Greco. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Dr. Rogers, please give us the superintendent's report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll offer everybody a welcome back to what I hope will be a wonderful new school year, starting tomorrow for our staff and starting next week for our young people. We had the opportunity this morning to welcome the freshmen to the high school and sixth graders here to Southwoods. I got to greet a lot of the students as they were coming back on campus, and they were so excited. Our seniors were here to pick up their parking passes and to sign the senior sign that is done every year. And the excitement of the school year beginning is upon us. So I hope everyone had a wonderful summer and got a chance to rest and recharge because I'm sure we're going to have an exciting school year ahead. So just some notes about the school year ahead, and then we're going to dive into a deeper conversation about facilities that the board has been engaged in for some time now. Something has already gone out to parents, but I want to just alert everyone that we will be moving to what a lot of school districts do, a 6-day rotation at the elementary school. And this has a number of benefits, not the least of which is, as we know, whenever there are federal holidays, they inevitably fall on Mondays. And so that means that if you don't do a rotation, whatever class falls on Monday often takes the brunt of all the closures. But it will also give us better structured time for specials. It will give us more time for interventions with students, therapies that they may need, school-wide enrichment that they'll be able to take advantage of. It actually frees up more time for English language learning, not just for English language learners, but also for any student, all students who are studying the English language. And it also gives us a little bit more efficiency in staffing, particularly as some of our staff are shared between the elementary schools and some of the middle schools. Having them on a similar rotation makes it a lot easier to do the scheduling and planning. Am I no longer on? Thank you. As we've gone to having a full-time social worker in every building, this will also free up time for us to have the social workers do some intentional work with our young people. So that's something to anticipate. We'll make sure that the websites reflect what day of the rotation the buildings are on, and I'm sure it's a transition that we'll become accustomed to soon enough. Just want to follow up on something that the board discussed at the last meeting. We wrote a letter to the town of Oyster Bay expressing some concerns about the and traffic implications of planned truck development on 80 Jericho Turnpike. The town did meet just a week or two ago and decided not to approve the application that was in place, so we're encouraged that the town took some of our feedback into consideration as they made that decision, and we appreciate that. One other thing as we go into the start of the school year, the state gave all school districts flexibility to adjust the length of school days below state minimums in order to deal with the pandemic. We did that here in Syosset. We shortened the high school day by 1 minute a period, a total of 9 minutes in the day, because that enabled us to have the traffic flow a little better between Southwoods Middle School and the high school dismissals. But that flexibility has ended along, hopefully, with the pandemic, and so we'll be returning to our pre-pandemic schedule. And I do anticipate that although we were able to do this smoothly prior to the pandemic, we all recognize that traffic patterns have shifted since. And so I do think that the first several weeks of this new schedule is going to be a work in progress. And so I ask for the patience of our staff and families as we make this transition and hopefully find ways to do it as smoothly as possible. One of the initiatives that was led by our students last year was to develop kosher, halal, and vegan meals, and we created a pilot program at the high school to try and make those options available to students. It was great to see students taking the lead, and it was fun for us as administrators to try and make that possible for them. What we did notice, however, though, is as the school year wore on, the utilization of those options dropped off precipitously, and by the end of the year, students weren't taking advantage of them at all. So we're going to re-engage with our students at the beginning of the year and ask if maybe we need to find more appealing options, or if there is some way that we can deliver that meets their dietary needs, but is also scalable for our food service folks. So we'll be meeting with students early in the year. And I'm also aware that there are a number of parents of younger kids who are not yet in the high school who are also interested in expanding options in the other buildings in the district. And so we'll be seeking to meet with parents who have other dietary needs or restrictions to see if it is possible for the food service provider that we use to service them. And just a note for the board, this is a year when we're planning to rebid. We periodically rebid the food services contract, and so this will be, the feedback that we get from both the kids and parents will be helpful as we develop the proposal for that contract for the coming year, so that we can serve the needs of the families here in this community. Also a follow-up from previous board meetings in the spring, we had been talking about a state requirement for us to offer what's called transitional bilingual education, because we have a large population of Mandarin-speaking young people in first and second grade. There was not a lot of interest among the parents in having a separate setting for those students to learn, and as a result, we did not have enough interest to be able to keep the program, so we notified the state that we would not have the program, but we are putting in place instead other options to support the young people's heritage language, so that the heritage language is not extinguished as they learn English here, and will meet the needs, but just in a different way. I understand that earlier this week there was a glitch with the provider that maintains our student management system, and that briefly some rosters were visible on the system before we caught the glitch. And while I know it would be appealing for folks to learn what the class rosters are going to be sooner rather than a little bit later in the week, I just ask the public's patience and indulgence. We actually don't set final rosters until noon on Wednesday, and we are literally watching registrations come in. We have class size maximums that we try to stay below, and we wait until the last possible second to make those decisions. So if we were to release rosters earlier, they might be out of date by Wednesday, and I wouldn't want to mislead any family or parent as to who their teacher is going to be, and only to change it 2 days later. So there are some draft rosters in there. You should consider them to be draft, but whatever we do on Wednesday will, of course, be final. And then just some updates for the board on the summer facilities work. One of the things that we've been working hard at is doing some ventilation upgrades for the pool facility. That project is on the 1 yard line. I see all the equipment is in place and is just waiting assembly. We had done a lot of work on the old tennis courts. Several years ago, we resurfaced them to try and extend their life by just a couple more years. But the challenges with those courts became such that there was no resurfacing them any longer, so we've completely refurbished them, and they were out there today striping and putting up the nets, and I anticipate we'll be on those shortly. I also did a quick tour of the Southwoods Library here in this building today. That was refurbished over the course of the last year by the district staff, who did just a remarkable job, and I know the students and staff here at Southwoods are excited to be in that space. And in each of the middle school gyms, we removed the hard folding partitions that are motorized and replace those with curtains. Obviously, the motorized partitions have the potential to be dangerous, and so we have eliminated them in both schools and have a much safer curtain option. So with that, Mr. Joffrey, if you could just turn the presentation on. Great, thank you so much. So at the last board meeting, I was asked a question about the pros and cons of having two high schools. So we did meet as an administrative team and sort through some of the research behind small schools and looked closely at our own academic program, and we tried to bundle our thoughts into some categories. But clearly the thing we care about most is academics, and we also care about our athletics programs, the activities that students have, and the cost of any initiative that we would do. On the academics, you can certainly find some research that illustrates that there are some benefits to having smaller schools. New York City notably did a lot of work with small schools, although the Gates Foundation, after pouring a lot of money into the Small Schools Initiative, eventually abandoned it. But there are certainly some research papers that show that graduation rates at least increased in New York City as a result of that, even though in many instances those buildings were all co-located in the same building, so as multiple schools residing in the same site. Here in Syosset, schools are not quite so big, and we observed that there would likely be some disadvantages to having course offerings spread across two schools. There would be a number of classes that would have to be duplicated in both schools, so that would mean that an elective would have to go away in order to replicate a class in two buildings. We also worry that if we were to push into two schools, it would probably be difficult to have the same breadth of academic program, same number of AP classes for students to take advantage of, for example. On athletics, certainly one advantage would be that more kids would likely participate, although we noted from other school districts that have feeder programs from the middle school that would look like what ours would be, that those feeder programs tend to not feed the high school as well, and so we would probably suffer from the same challenges. But ultimately, there would be smaller, less competitive teams comprised of more athletes, so there might be more opportunity, but perhaps less success. And because there are fewer middle school teams, having more high school teams would mean more competitions and therefore more transportation costs. The high school boasts 62 clubs. The wonderful thing about that is there literally is something for everyone. And the challenge would be if you had two high schools and you had a fixed amount of stipends that you were able to afford, you'd either have to choose to have half the clubs or twice the stipends. Right now we have a number of what are called competition clubs. We think of these as our students going and competing in state and sometimes national competitions. Clearly you'd want to have those at both high schools, so you'd have to duplicate those clubs. And as with athletics, diluting the talent in those clubs may impact their success. With facilities, we tried to imagine how we would accomplish this with the existing physical plant the district has, and Clearly, reversing the positions of the two middle schools with the high school lends itself as the obvious first consideration. So the challenge then would be the high school presently houses 4 classes of roughly 550 students. If we were to reverse that and try to put those 4 classes into the 2 buildings that only house 3 classes worth of the district-wide student body, there's simply not enough space at the middle school. So that would mean that you'd have to either build a lot of space at what is currently a middle school, or you'd have to think about keeping the 9th grade in a middle school building, which is considered to be a pretty undesirable configuration. The other thing about the middle schools is they really don't have the facility space to operate what we would consider to be high school level programs. Certainly in sciences, there aren't any wet labs. So varsity gyms, the gyms in both middle schools are really too small for varsity sports. So those would be considerations as well, the upgrades that the facilities would have to go through. When we were asked this question, the administration was cautioned to make sure that we were thinking outside of the box and not to just take the existing configuration for granted. We certainly appreciate that admonition. Earlier this year, we had done as an administrative team a thought exercise around whether a Princeton plan might be a way to accommodate some of the anticipated growth that's going to be at the high school in the coming years. For the uninitiated, the Princeton plan is when you collect all the grade levels together in a single building. Often schools do this at the elementary school level, where kindergarten and first grade would be in one building, second and third grade would be in a different building, et cetera. At the high school level, we imagine that this would be configured as 7th and 8th grade at HPT, 6th and 7th grade at HPT, 8th and 9th grade at Southwoods, because 9th graders and 8th graders participate often in varsity sports, so having it located close to the existing high school would be helpful. So the advantages would be that you wouldn't have to build as much space at the high school to accommodate the bubble, but you would have to still build that space somewhere, and that somewhere would inevitably be at Southwoods Middle School. So you wouldn't have to build as much space as you would to flip the high school with both middle schools, but you would still have to build some more space, and you'd be investing that space in a building that served middle school as opposed to serving all of the high schoolers in the district. So after a lot of discussion as an administrative team, we didn't feel that the appeal and the advantages of a change in configuration outweighed our current configuration, but we thought that the exercise was certainly worthwhile to make sure that we weren't locked in our own thinking or constrained just by the existing facilities that we had. We also have with us tonight H2M, our architecture and engineering firm, and we also have Elite Construction managers who have been managing the summer work that the district is going through. They have been working together as a team with us, the administration, on larger tasks that we were given by the board at the June board meeting, where the board asked us to take the visual inspection report that was prepared by H2M and identify priorities within that report. So certainly not all of the work is health and safety related, not all of the work is of an immediate nature. Is it possible to stratify this work into more immediate priorities and less immediate priorities so that the district doesn't have to take on quite as much work and quite as much expense in the short term? So this is the slide that set that conversation up. These are the enrollment projections that we continue to look at. At that meeting 2 months ago, we talked about the first 2 columns worth of space, and we said we would come back to the last 2 columns worth of space, and that's the conversation for this evening. And then we laid out the overall amount of work that needed to be done. So in the visual inspection report prioritization, we came up with 5 criteria. The architects came up with 5 criteria for evaluating whether something would be more near-term or more long-term. And clearly, improving safety is a near-term interest of the district. Second would be preserving the infrastructure. So if there's an improvement that needs to be made so that something doesn't deteriorate further and become more costly to repair in the future, that would be something that we would take on. There are some places where modernization is not necessary and could be delayed. But there's some places where modernization is necessary because we need to be compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we stratified those two things. And we certainly identified a number of building systems that are nearing the end of their useful life. And what has been impressed upon me is the lead time for some of the equipment that would be needed to replace, that would be needed in order to replace some of these building systems is extraordinarily long. So it may be over a year from the time we would order a piece of equipment till when that piece of equipment would arrive here. So to the extent that we have some systems that are critical to building function, as they're nearing the end of their life, we shouldn't wait for the piece to fail, because we'll be delayed a year before we'd be able to fix it. So these are things that we should anticipate and replace while they're still functioning well, even if they have a year or two left on their life, because not having them might be catastrophic. So having gone through that exercise, and I'll go into just a little bit more detail in a minute, we identified about $49 million worth of immediate priorities that we would anticipate recommending be in the district's next bond issue. We think that there's about $23 million worth of work overall that we can continue to chip away at in the district's annual budget, as we have been doing for the past 9 years. And together that would get us to the $88 million in work that was identified in the visual inspection. This slide shows how that $49 million would break down by school. And this slide shows how the work that we would do internally through the district budget would break down by school. And I would note that there are several projects that are currently underway that are already in the current year's budget that were also identified in the visual inspection. Some pointing work here at Southwoods Middle School and some chimney work at Village Elementary School. So one of the things that we talked about at previous meetings is the portables that exist on many of our campuses are well past their period of probable usefulness and their anticipated lifespan. So we need to anticipate how to replace them. That replacement will be easier to do at some campuses than others, just because of the topography of the campus and how it's laid out. And we are also anticipating, again, enrollment growth and wanting to keep our program, the excellent educational program that we have here, as close to state-of-the-art as we can. So we've talked in the past about a number of projects that might lend themselves to that work. So at the high school, to accommodate the enrollment bubble that we're anticipating, could be 10, 12, maybe even more % additional gym space, and we've been looking at fabric, air-supported, and other fabrics, supported fabric structures, because they're less expensive than building something like a field house. We've been looking at options for additional classroom space, two options of similar cost, but one would result in building an additional library space and converting the existing library space into a number of classrooms. To me, that feels like a more bang for your buck kind of a way to approach it. The high school auditorium is in need of some upgrades and repair. The pool is also has been well maintained, but is in need of some repair at some point. And then just anticipating some of the busing challenges that we may experience this fall. We have some ideas for how we can use the campus to dismiss more efficiently, and that may become something that becomes a higher priority as we get into the fall and we see what the new traffic patterns are like. At the middle schools, the biggest need for enrollment growth is going to be here at Southwoods, and we anticipated that if we vacated the administrative offices here and converted them to classroom space, that might cost about $1 million, but it would net us 7.5 classroom spaces, 7 full-size classrooms and 1 other space. At HBT, we're probably close to our maximum pupil growth, so I don't anticipate more growth at HBT, But one thing we've observed is that students at HBT don't have access to the same athletic facilities that students at Southwoods have because of their proximity here to the high school. At the elementary schools, clearly Walt Whitman and Berry Hill are two buildings that are very tight now. We've priced earlier in a previous meeting what it would cost to replace the portables in kind at Walt Whitman, but we've also talked about a more extensive rehabilitation that would prepare the campus to house any additional growth, because there are some properties in the area that have the potential for future growth. At Berry Hill, that's a campus that presents some architectural and engineering challenges. I don't have any good numbers for you, the board, yet, because we are still trying to come up with a plan that we think is feasible without being extraordinarily expensive. And something that the board asked us to research previously: what would the cost be of developing elementary kitchens in every one of the elementary schools? And obviously, depending on how extensive the renovations are to Whitman, that would be something that wouldn't have to be taken care of through that project. So I don't mean with any of these to say that any of these are foregone conclusions. This is research that was necessary to answer several of the board's questions from previous meetings about what some ideas would be for approaching the growth that we've had, and the growth that we anticipate. So I do have the architects and engineers and our construction managers on hand so that they can answer more detailed questions. So I'm sure the board will have questions about how we prioritize the work, what kinds of things would be done, what the lead times are for construction, et cetera, and myself and the staff are all here at your disposal.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers, for that thorough presentation. Are there any questions from the board for Dr. Rogers or the construction management? Mr. Ostrick?
More of just an observation. For process standpoint, do you want to divide up, instead of opening the entire presentation up to questions, do you want to go section by section and maybe close sections, or do you just want to open it to all comments at once?
I think we can just open to all. This way someone can just tag along if you have additional questions. Thank you. Mr. Ostrick?
Sure. So I guess we could start in the facilities area. I guess the first question that I have regarding the buckets of, let me make a statement first. From my point of view, the visual inspection report details in terms of tranching it between current highest priority. First of all, thank you guys. I imagine that was a significant amount of work to create that tranching. It seems like, and I don't know, I don't want to poll the board, but it seems like there's not much left to discuss with the visual inspection report, in the sense that this is work that's being recommended that needs to get done. I mean, maybe there are thoughts, comments, opinions about it, but from my point of view, I feel like that part of the discussion is closed, and that we ought to be focusing on the next sort of stages of the construction facilities budget. That was part of how I wanted to tier the discussion.
All right, so we had a meeting back in July, and we spoke about that, and the construction management, they were here too. But if anyone else on the board, still has questions about that, they could ask too. If not, you could ask additional questions on this next part.
So I did have some questions about sort of the next sort of buckets in terms of timing of when things may or may not need to happen either simultaneously or one before the other. So if I'm thinking about the Syosset High School element, right? That's the furthest part down in the future where we contemplate it, 7 or 8 years in future. Is that approximately the idea? Okay, so those are probably the projects that can be deferred for consideration for 3 or 4 years, assuming it's a 4-year cycle, is a relatively good estimate for the things we need to do, unless, and this is where the question comes in, are there things that need to be done sequentially or cannot be done at the same time, or things that need to be done before other things in order for the program growth at the high school to happen? So obviously the busing element in the back of the school can happen anytime. The robotics in the guide suite, that switch, I'm wondering if there has to be an order, or if doing one project before another stops us from doing a second. In other words, how much of this can we defer out into the future, and how much needs to be done sequentially beforehand?
I think it's an insightful question. The one reason for breaking out the two different approaches to building classrooms is because you might want not to build them both simultaneously, but to build 5 classrooms, see if the growth is on the trajectory that was projected. If it is, then you know you will need the other 5 classrooms, and you might start that project second. But if you build the 5 classrooms and the growth trajectory doesn't go there, or there is some other kind of societal shift like we experienced the last 2 years that makes all of our enrollment projections outdated all of a sudden because of some economic change, then we won't have committed to quite so much construction. We won't have the luxury of too much delay just because of the tremendous amounts of lead time that are built into the process. We, of course, have to have a public vote, but then after that public vote, anticipate 40 weeks of waiting for approval at the state, and the state can't even look at the drawings until they're made, and that'll often take about 6 months for the architects to do the actual drawings for the projects that we propose. So it may be a year and a half before we might have approval to start construction, and then that construction will be subject to the bidding process, finding a summer to start, because generally we start in the summers, and if there are any long lead time items in that project, such as like HVAC equipment has really long lead time, electrical equipment like switchgear has a really long lead time. So that might delay it as well. So even though the peak is likely to be 8 years out, we'll be halfway to the peak in 4 years. So I think we'll have to start at least one project for accommodating that growth sooner rather than later, so that we'll be somewhere near that. And then we'll have the opportunity in a year or two to decide whether the trajectory argues for accommodating even more growth. And maybe I'll pause myself there in a second and see if Megan or Kevin, you want to jump in on that at all as well to amplify what I said.
Will it automatically work? Hi. I would agree with your statement, Dr. Rogers, that with the lead times and the lead time to submit to the state and do the drawings, it doesn't give you as much time as you feel that you have for the 8-year bubble that is predicted.
Working backwards, 4 years isn't a good estimate of the amount of time we need. Is it 6 years? I'm trying to get a sense of, do we have to start tomorrow?
The sooner there's always better. I would say you want to start within 4 to 6 years prior to when you need it.
And just because we've seen so much price escalation in the construction market recently, the other advantage to starting sooner is that we experience less inflationary escalation by getting started sooner.
Mr. Greco.
So I have a lot of things. I'll try to keep them short. So in the order of your presentation, I agree with your analysis and conclusions with respect to the school configuration, and I should commend Mr. Ostrick and yourself for thinking outside the box, because I love hearing ideas even when they're tossed away. One of the things that I note from from the information, and I've been stewing on it for a while, is we talk about the Southwoods Administrative Wing and the cost to convert that to classroom space. And I view that as just like 1/3 of a triangle, right? You have that as a potential option. You have renting space somewhere locally for the administration as an option, which of course would go along with the first. And then you have a third option, which is finding our own space. I hate to throw out the Woodbury School as an option, but in your presentation you talk about the cost to refurbish the schools. So I view the three of them in their own little universe when we talk about how to add classroom space to Southwoods. And I think the missing component in the spreadsheet is a feel for what rental costs are for the room we'd need. And I wonder what that is. And I'll pause there.
Sure. Dr. Rufo has been looking at rental space actually quite a bit over the course of the last several years. When we needed to spread out as a result of the pandemic, we looked at rental space so that we could spread administrators out a little bit and have less congestion, no pun intended, among our administrators. So I think she has a pretty good feel for that market. Dr. Rufo, could you answer Mr. Greco's question?
We did research and visit several locations actually within the boundaries of the district, both once pre-pandemic and once at the end. And prices, and we thought we'd see some decreases, more decreases in commercial property than we actually did see. I hate to quote it, but I thought, were you looking for a specific number of how much we thought? Yes, my recollection, and again, I think it was the facilities area and facilities and technology. And I think it was close to $80,000 a year. But I would really have to put a big caveat around that to look again.
Let me rephrase what I'm asking for. So we know what it would cost right now if we wanted to convert the admin space at Southwoods, right? $1 million. But of course, we need office space. So that number's, not as helpful in a vacuum. And I'm just wondering if that number with the rental, with the idea that we may actually own space right now that could be refurbished or rehabbed and used for office space should all be discussed together. And that's really all. So this isn't, let's put Dr. Rufo on the spot right now for the current rental pricing, but that's really where I wanted to go with that. I didn't want to, push. I just think we need the three together.
Right. So perhaps I could, I agree that those three shouldn't be considered in isolation because if you're going to use that as classrooms, there are clearly offices that will be displaced. And maybe the way to analyze that would be to ask the question, what's the mortgage payment that $80,000 a year you would be paying to rent office space would pay for? In other words, how much refurbishment would you get if you plowed that into one of your own buildings instead of plowing it into a rental payment? So we can certainly do that work, and I know Dr. Rufo would rather sharpen her pencil than give me any more estimates of rental costs in this meeting. But we can certainly come back to you at the next meeting. That I don't think will be a challenging effort for us to do, and we can put that together, and then you'll be able to balance out the cost of renting versus the cost of refurbishing a facility that you already own.
Right, and just for order of magnitude, what's the square footage we're talking about in office space? Just like that the Woodbury schools would be accommodating relative to the amount of rental?
So I know the Woodbury School is about 14,000 square feet. Is that right, Megan?
I don't have that number off the top of my head right now, but I could get that.
I feel pretty confident with that number. I'm probably ballpark with 14,000. So, and Dr. Rufo, do you have any idea how much square footage is?
I don't recall. You mean when we looked for it, when we, where's my pal Greg? What's, does he remember? I don't remember. I think we'll have to get back to you on that.
I think, to just get to your question, Jack, when I do order of magnitude, a classroom is anywhere between 700 and 1,000 square feet, and we would get back 7.5 classrooms if we did the whole wing. So let's say that's anywhere between 5,000 and 7,000 square feet of space, and that building is about 14,000 square feet of space. Not all of it great space, because some of it's in the tower, and the tower is not handicapped accessible, and an elevator would be $500,000 at least to access a couple hundred square feet. To me, that's a waste. So I think to pursue this, we should come back to you with, here's what we think is ADA accessible space in that building, how many square feet that is, and here's what we're currently using at Southwoods, and then we'll do a little bit more market analysis on the rental market.
That's freeing up square footage in other locations and combining offices from administration from across the district. And I'm just trying to put the total in my head.
I just wanted to circle back to the percentage that we get back from the state when we do projects. So just a couple of questions. I think it was it 42% that we get back? So of the projects that are suggested here for the visual inspection, so that 88 million, like, and the other things, the future and the growth and all that, you may not know offhand, but how much of that will qualify for us to get back the 42% from that? Is it all of it? Is it half of it? You know, I don't know if you know offhand.
I don't know offhand, but Ms. Bellato, I know, can tell you the process by which the State Ed Department decides what spaces are aidable, the term is aidable, and what spaces are not aidable. And even though we can't say with precision what that number is going to be, we can talk to you generally about how the process works. So, Megan?
When we're looking to package the drawings, there's certain things like site work, which is not aidable. You look to package those projects with other things that are aidable. So say at HBT, the vestibule and the site work, combining those together to get aid on that site work, where if you did it by itself, you wouldn't technically get aid on that. So depending on how you package those drawings and what the scope of work is, that will project your aid amount based on that.
Is there any way to give a ballpark of, if, assuming that you guys, have an expertise in packaging it the right way, because that would obviously be something we want to do, is package it to get the most back that we could. Is there any kind of ballpark figure for it, or too hard to tell?
I think Dr. Rufo would have to answer that question.
I think the determination of aid is even, Megan mentioned one factor, which is if something qualifies for aid based on it being site work or not site work. Additionally, there are other measures that state aid planning will do to determine how much aid you'll get. For example, they will look at the building aid units. Just for example, if you just wanted to build additional science classrooms, not that they didn't make a determination that they thought based on their numbers that were needed, and I'm not saying this because I think that that's what we're talking about here, but there are other factors that they look at that makes it a little bit difficult just broadly to determine how much aid you would get. Sometimes, I think when we did phase 2, we made a rough estimate of maybe 75 to 80% when we were first starting out, and then revised that. So we'd have to look a little bit more at the packaging of the projects, Additionally, we also have to look at the aid and the packaging of the projects sort of more longer term, because we may have a plan, which we had in phase 2, of projects that we wanted to package together, but then you may not have the same level of approval of projects from the state that you anticipated. So that also factors into the predictability of aid.
So I can only speak for myself, but I know when I look at this, just from a financial standpoint, it can make a difference whether or not we can do more projects and, you know, how we package it. So if there's any way to say, like, you know, it kind of feels like, you know, if you spend $70, you get $20 back, you know, and so it doesn't make sense to not spend the, if you're at 65, to spend the 70, because then you're really only spending 50.
Yep. Oh.
So at least for me, it would be helpful to kind of get an idea of, and also for timing wise, I guess if we package it certain ways, but we're going to get back 42% of it, then it might make sense to do the timing in certain ways to maximize what we get back from the state. And then I have one more question on that, but what you said kind of answers me. So we would, I guess, lay out, we'd have to get funding for the whole project, and then we would get back what we would get back, because you can't count on
Correct.
what it is. Okay.
And just so the board understands how that works, once we do some borrowing to finance this construction, we would do the entire borrowing, and then the state reimburses us by essentially paying part of the mortgage with us. So the state also wants to mortgage these costs and not pay them in the present. So the way they do that is by basically piggybacking on our mortgage, and they have what are called assumed amortization rates. So even if we were to pay it off in a shorter period of time than 20 years, the state will reimburse us as though it was financed over a 20-year period, because that's their preferred period to pay things back. So, and I don't mean to be so in the weeds, but because you're asking about how this works, I thought you might find it useful to understand that it's the state won't give us that reimbursement up front. They will defray that cost over time as we pay the project financing back.
I just think, at least for me, it would be super helpful, just because I think if we can maximize that, you know, it's obviously an extraordinarily large project and we have so much we want to do. So if there's a way to, you know, maximize what we get back, and even with the state, ways to know that if that money is coming, if it's amortized over the 20 years, to play with that payment, because then you could use that over the next 20 years, say, okay, we're getting back $10 a year from the state, so we could put the $10 towards one of the, you know, just to maximize it so that less money is coming from us and more money is coming from the state.
The advantage that we have is this is the highest our aid ratio has ever been, 42%. When I got here 9 years and 2 months ago, our aid ratio was 16%. So the last round of work that we did was reimbursed at a much lower level by the state. Will be reimbursed at a much higher level. And believe me, everyone working on this team knows that our job is to maximize reimbursement from the state.
From this graph, if it takes 4 to 6 years for the construction to be done, by the time we're done with elementary school, does it seem like we don't even need it anymore? That's the first question. And second is for the elite team. The high school auxiliary gym and the prefab buildings for the elementary schools, what would be the energy cost difference compared to a regular brick structure? And we got 3 different choices for the auxiliary gym. Is one better than another in terms of the energy cost? And one more for lead team is in Walt Whitman estimate. Do we have the prefab estimate in here, or is that not included in this estimate given?
So while the team confers on your second question, I'll answer the first. So when we talked about this the last time, I pointed out that the current trajectory shows our two tightest schools, Berry Hill and Walt Whitman, leveling off, but not dropping. And they're leveling off at a pretty tight level. So the next question becomes, in the current market, it does not seem like the Sagamore property, 70 townhouses or so of recent construction, is generating a lot of students. But that doesn't mean it will never generate a lot of students. So to me, that looks like 70 residential units that have the potential to have some, to generate some students. And there have been several other projects on Pickett's Lane and on Jericho Turnpike that have been rumored to turn into multiple dwelling unit housing developments. They haven't come to fruition, but it certainly occurs to me that those properties remain potential development targets. And so I think if we were in the process of building space, we don't want to build too much space, and the state won't aid us. That's Dr. Rufo's point about building units. The state won't pay us to overbuild, but we wouldn't want to go through a construction process and not build to anticipate that there is the potential for more student generation from some of these large tracts of land that have been rumored to be developed at one point or another. So I don't think you would be unwise to try and build in some extra space because it gives you, space never goes to waste, but it does give you flexibility if there is continued growth in the district. And Mike, if you could talk to us a little bit about the different kinds of fabric structures and their relative energy efficiencies.
Yes, sir. Good evening. So one of the things that you were talking about as far as one of the things that we looked at is with the high school construction, each of those different facilities that we were examining, they could be insulated to different levels. It all depends on what is being provided. So all of them could be insulated to a certain degree as desired, and that would be something that would be worked along with H2M to come up with those specifications and all as far as requirements of what we're looking at as far as our installation of those facilities. Second thing is we were talking about as far as prefabrication. One of the things that we did as far as with Walt Whitman, we looked at that as far as being new construction versus prefabrication. You're able to have your prefabricated facilities designed to certain levels also, so they have that level of flexibility that you're able to do with the curtain walls and things of that nature at the fabrication facilities, and that just has to be something that's designed and taken consideration and working along with H2M on that regards. And I think that was two of the questions. Was there a third one, ma'am?
So the estimate that we received, it does not include the prefab building.
The estimate that we worked on as far as with Walt Whitman did not include a prefab. That was for new construction.
But it does have classroom additions.
Yes.
So the estimate includes building new classrooms. Just Mike is saying that the estimate was done as though it was new construction as opposed to prefab.
Ms. Abramson, please.
Sorry, Dr. Rogers, just a follow-up on what you said about the elementary schools and building and new communities coming. While I totally understand that we do need to expand and easier to do things and make room now and anticipate, if it came to fruition that new communities were built on those areas, do they necessarily get zoned to Whitman or whatever? Can we look for, I mean, if we have schools that are trending downward, can we zone new construction appropriately so that we don't have to overbuild what we have?
Absolutely. So the elementary zones are completely within the discretion of the school board. And I think in the event that something would happen, you might consider approaching the zoning in multiple ways. So there is a neighborhood in the district that I think was built about 15 years ago, and the school board at the time was concerned about having all of the residents of that neighborhood go to a single school district. So that particular neighborhood feeds several different elementary schools. So it has been done before, it's been done by us. So you have that option at any time. The only challenge with trying to meet that need at a certain point in time is that I've observed that the buildings they tend to be cyclical. So they're all elementary kids. For some reason there's a surge, but then they all become middle school kids together. The house doesn't sell, but suddenly the elementary population there drops. But once those kids are out of high school, there's another elementary surge again. And because changing elementary zones is so disruptive, I don't think it's an ideal strategy to sort of chase the bubble by changing zones. I think you'd want to anticipate, maybe do that once where you would rezone to try and rebalance, and then we would do what we did now, which is enrollment projections to try and make sure that we got it right the first time.
Wait. No, I didn't mean rezone what we have, because that scares people, and that's not at all what I meant. So I don't want to scare anybody. I meant if land was bought like Sagamore and new housing was created, instead of like Sagamore's at Whitman, and we already feel that Whitman is at the seams, and if we are building, but we see that other schools are not at the seams, if there's a new community that comes in, it doesn't necessarily have to be zoned to Whitman, or that was more my question. If it's a brand new, unzoned, new thing, not people in their current, because I'm scared of getting that out there. So I just wanted to clarify.
And I understood your question. I was just too expansive in my answer. I apologize.
Any more questions? Mr. Ostrich?
Sure. So on the topic of elementary school expansion, I think we have a real opportunity here to think strategically over the next 5, 10, 20 years. I mean, the elementary schools have not been meaningfully expanded, renovated, improved. To some limited degree, yes, but to a large degree, it's been decades and decades and decades. And if we were more thoughtful about thinking in 5-year or 7-year increments and going through all the schools 2 or 3 at a time or 4 at a time, so that we get to 10 over a 15 or a 20-year increment. In my mind, the elementary schools, all of them are due a significant series of changes, whether they're gyms or cafeterias or improving and increasing some of the classroom space. There are probably, of the 7 elementary schools, I sent around the projections to all of you in terms of the number of students per square foot. There are 4 of them, at least over the next 5 to 7 years, that probably are bumping up against what would be considered tight constraints. So if Berry Hill and Whitman are the 2 that are most at odds, Bayless was there 3 or 4 years ago. I almost wish the board at that time had this conversation and thought to themselves about whether or not we should be taking the opportunity to expand those facilities to accommodate so that we don't have OT and on stages or in the hallway or art on a card and things like that. There's no reason why we shouldn't be thinking in 15 or 20-year increments for all of the elementary schools. It just so happens that these are 2 that are at the most risk currently, but 5 years from now, it could easily be Bayless or South Grove or Robbins Lane or AP Willits, because the number of addresses are distributed relatively equally across the district, and where people choose to move and relocate is not something that's subject to easy projection. To me, the opportunity here is for us to think in terms of 5 to 7 year increments for all the buildings. Just happens that Whitman and Berry Hill are the ones in the current difficulties. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, we're thinking of building 4 classrooms, not 20 at Whitman. Okay.
All right, thank you. Ms. Falco?
I know I'm kind of jumping the gun a little bit, but in terms of funding for the project, is there a way for us to get a broad, like general, I know we obviously don't know how much we're funding because we haven't decided what we're doing or not doing yet, but just to say if you fund, $10 million, then this costs this much to the district and this much to the community, just so we kind of have an idea of the impact that it makes to kind of give us, help us figure out where our budget is and how much we think we can feasibly ask for and spend.
Yeah, I would take that as a homework assignment rather than do it off the top of my head, but for sure.
Yeah, you're great, but I didn't think that was coming off the top of anyone's head.
Mr. Greco, a quick question.
I guess Ms. Falco gave me this idea, but I wonder if maybe in the future, not right now, and please don't ask Dr. Rufo, if we should be putting together some kind of priorities list now, because if we're going to push this out as a, one large project, should we have A priority, B priority, C priority lined up now? Like say, HPT's vestibule, priority A, right? Maybe the library is priority B, and maybe the pool is priority C. So we could see it all that way and sort of decide maybe we only want to go forward with A and B now, A and B having more of the space constraint issues. You put them in buckets in a way that I think it's doing that already, but it's not giving me the ability to sort of say, let's just go forward with A and B, total of 60 million, and leave that other 28 million for down the road.
Or just because funding rolls off and comes back on. So if you take money and then it ends, you could continue it on. So I feel like if we have a 10-year plan to say, okay, we're doing A first, B first, but it's just rolling, so it's spread over the amount of time, as opposed to, getting the money all in one jump. That way it could just keep going with the priority list, if that makes sense. I feel like we should be really cognizant of not going back over and over to the community to ask for money and again, that we should, make a plan so that we know where we're going for the next many years and what we want to do, so we could figure out the financials of it, so that we don't, in 5 years, we don't say, oh, okay, so now we're going to do this, so now we need, we should try to streamline it so we have like a master plan, as Jack always likes to say, to look forward, to plan it out.
All right. Ms. Abramson?
I guess mine was related to what everybody was saying over there. I felt like it was broken out, but I felt like there's a lot of, there's safety and end of useful life items here, and there was a bond that we were talking about related to that group. I guess I was wondering, how do we start the motions of things as opposed to the discussions? And also, there were items on there that are amazing, and I would love to do them, but what happens if we financially can't when they come up?
Well, in the end, this is exactly the conversation that we, the administration, need you as the board to have so that you can lead us, because we can present you with ideas, we can present you with recommendations, and you're stewards of the community's finances, and you're stewards of this incredible asset that the community has built. And some of this is, we need some help calibrating with your judgment what your strategy is for the long term, and what sorts of time periods you want to approach this in, and how you want to stratify the work over time, and where your priorities are among the various things that are, some are necessary, and I know that's a priority you all share, the things that are necessary, but you also have priorities of how the educational program is delivered, both to make sure that there's elbow room in the building so that you don't feel constraints, and to make sure that the program is top-notch, because that's why people want to move here. But at some point, there are limits. So we'll present you with these good ideas. We'll go back and beat the ideas up to make them less expensive, or maybe not quite as ambitious, and bring them back to you. And then at some point, we're looking for you to give us some guidance as to how you'd like to move forward with the community. And I feel like only you can do that.
So I just have two questions, Dr. Rogers. One is, I know we want to get the facilities, everything started ASAP because there's years ahead of us. So everybody's anxious to kind of get some kind of list so that we can go through and get the final numbers, and then obviously it has to be addressed to the public and whatnot. If we were to take a special vote for that, instead of waiting until May, if we were able to put all of this together in a very short period of time, if we could do it, what would be the earliest, would you say, time that a vote could take place? That's my first question. Like, how soon do you think we could take a vote, or do you think it's not possible? We'd have to wait till the May vote because it is extensive and we need that amount of time.
I think you could get a vote done before May. The advantage, as we did with Phase 2, that vote was, I believe, in February or early March. Every month that we have makes it more likely that we get to use the next summer that is a year and a couple of months later. But by the time you vote in May, you've pretty much lost the next summer, so then you're out 2 more years. So that's the advantage of going sooner. So I still think that that is possible, but we'll have to keep at it in order to get there.
And just one more question regarding Woodbury School. So there's 2 estimates of Woodbury School to demo it and Woodbury School to renovate it. My question is, we have to, like Brian was saying before, we have to start thinking together as far as Southwood's business office. If we were to take those offices, I would assume we wouldn't want to take a rental on forever, since we have actual space in our district to utilize. And when I say actual space, I'm saying Woodbury School. So for us, I think one of the important things that we need to look at ASAP also is, if we're going to renovate the school, what are we getting out of it? Because at the top of here, and I'm not sure if I'm reading this correctly, but it says the square footage is 19,800. Could that be right?
It could be. There's a tower room, and then off the tower room, there's some square footage that's in like a high ceiling to attic that could be refurbished. There's a basement there that is not appealing. So what's in that number, I'm not exactly sure. I know that when we laid it out back in 2018, we were thinking that there was about 14,000 feet of usable space that we might be able to convert to, and for some reason that number stuck in my head.
So my thought is, if we're going to renovate it, obviously it's a high number. We have to see what we're gaining from it. Is it enough space for what we need? Okay. But if we're looking to demo it, because that building is sitting there, and for every month that it's sitting there and every winter that it goes through, as we know with our own houses, it just keeps deteriorating and it gets worse and worse. So if we're looking to demo the building, then that becomes vacant land that we look to do what with? Then are we going to look to build a new facility? Are we going to look to try to put like a prefab facility? How much would that cost? Is that even feasible? Would we be looking to build a new office space, if that's what we need, some kind of like maybe community space / office space? So I think that's something too, that within all of these necessary, which the number is very high, but these are all necessary improvements within the district that need to be done. I think the Woodbury School is something that's really high priority as well in the next set of discussions with this.
Yeah, Since we've been talking about the Woodbury School, we've always given the board these two estimates in parallel, because you can look at the cost of rehabilitating it, but it's really the net cost, because one way or the other, at some point, it will deteriorate to the point of no return. It's not there yet. So then you'll have no choice left but the demo cost. So the cost of refurbishing the space is really the difference between the demo cost and the other. And the cost that's there is kind of a soup to nuts. It includes an elevator. I think you could get a lot of square footage out of the building without an elevator, and the additional square footage you'd get with an elevator probably doesn't justify its cost. So I think that there is some value engineering that could be done in that site. And yes, it's an asset of the district, and it's an asset that if we wanted to invest in, we could preserve longer.
And just a quick comment on that school too, is that it is historical, and it is a piece of Syosset, the Syosset-Woodbury community's history. So to demo it, if it gets to the point that it needs to be demoed, to some degree, it's kind of losing a part of the community's history. So if we could salvage it and make it, obviously it has to be useful, and for us, it would. I just feel like it would be. It's worthwhile to try to salvage it. That's all.
Anyone else with questions? Mr. Ostrich?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe it's time to move off questions and develop a process by which we can get the priority list of the board in front of the superintendent. So how can we all stand up and say what the priority list is so that they can actually get working and we can move the process forward? What is the process for us to get the priority list in front of the superintendent as a board discussion so that it actually happens?
We do have the visual inspections from the engineers, and then so to me, that's the top priority because it involves the safety, and safety is always the top priority for the board. And so if the board can revolve around that discussion to look at the visual inspection report and then talk about all of the different projects in that report, and then this will give Dr. Rogers and the construction management companies a good idea of where the board is headed to.
Rogers needs is a board priority list for the additional parts. What is the process by which we can actually all raise our hands and say, this is my priority A, this is my priority B, this is my priority C, and then we can come to a conclusion so that we can give an actual set of instructions to the superintendent so we can move the process forward.
So that would be helpful, and perhaps I could build on Brian's suggestion in order to get to where you'd like to be. We'll work on trying to stratify into sort of an A, B, and C category, and then that will prompt a discussion among the board whether you agree with our ranking of priorities. And from that discussion, it will be clear whether we have ordered them in a way that reflects your priorities. And if not, you'll instruct us that things that we put as A, maybe you would view as B, and things that we put as C, maybe you would view as A. But we can prepare for you. Because just as with the visual inspection, I agree with you. I think the work that's been done has illustrated the work that must be done. And we'll do some value engineering in there, but I don't think that there's any real decision-making left in there. So if we narrow now our focus to the things that require a decision, we can prepare a first cut rough draft, and then you'll tell us where we're wrong.
Can you also include in that, though, funding and, how the impact and, if we need $10, then this is how much, people pay or the impacts on communities, so that way we can make a educated decision to say, okay, we can spend $20, but we can't spend $40, you know? You figure it out. Thanks.
Yeah, and we need a placeholder for Berry Hill.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So are we all good? So we'll have Dr. Rogers prepare the list for us and then for the board discussion. Okay, thank you. Okay, now moving on to the next agenda item. So the board had a busy summer attending various events, and that included New York State School Board Association Annual Summer Law Conference, Scope Dinner, New Teacher Orientation, Facilities Tour, Facilities Meeting, and also the tour of a modular building in Hicksville. And I know many of us participated in these events, and so if anyone wants to talk about a particular event, please feel free to do so. Okay. Mr. Greco?
So I probably should have done this earlier because it's about the prefab, but Dr. Park and I toured with Dr. Rogers and Mr. Hamilton, and I took some notes. We toured the Willett Avenue School in Hicksville. It's a Nassau BOCES building that had a prefab structure that was about 10 years old. So I'll just try to run through my notes fast. So, after 10 years, it looks like it's holding up well, but it also appeared to be what I'd call or Dr. Rogers called, an economy class prefab structure. So, for example, the outside of the structure didn't look any different than our portables, in my opinion. And Dr. Park is nodding. So I think we should have a tour, even if it's just a couple of us run out to a prefab structure that is, the Ritz-Carlton of prefab structures, so we can get a feel for the difference, and then we can price out the difference. The BOCES folks that were there were really helpful, and we were able to ask a lot of questions. And the thing that struck me was almost all of the work is done off-site. So the electrical is done off-site, the windows are done off-site, the fire system is done off-site. So very little needs to be done, and except for things like, it seems like just hooking it up and then putting things like blinds in place. So if everything's done off-site, I think they said this one was delivered in early August 10 years ago and was ready for the start of school. So you're talking about a 3 to 4 week turnaround from when this thing is delivered. And then one of the other big things I noticed was it is 10 years old. It was built on a wood frame. So I guess you can drop these on a slab or you can put them up on a frame. And what seemed to be happening is the wood frame where the beams were, you could see the rooms were starting to sag. So again, economy scale, I'm hoping the Ritz has a better version of this. But, those were my big takeaways. But, even though it wasn't the nicest thing to look at, it definitely seems, if it's priced where we've seen the estimates, it's absolutely worth something to consider.
As I mentioned to Mr. Greco and Dr. Park, I was the superintendent at Nassau BOCES at the time that we made the decision to invest in those. And the reason why they were an economy class was because the building is a rental from Hicksville, and so BOCES didn't want to invest too much money into someone else's property, but we needed the space because the program was growing at the time, and that was the most economical solution. Just one slight addition. It's on concrete piers, but you were you said wood, so they're on concrete piers, but we definitely saw some settlement issues along the girder lines on the floors. So I think they've held up remarkably well, but they were not intended to be the best of the best at the time because it didn't make economic sense at the time.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to talk about the events we attended in the summer? No? All right.
I think it was super helpful that you guys went to tour those prefabs, and that it's actually, I had a couple of questions related to it, but in general, the summary is helpful for me because I can't make every event that board members can attend, And so having a summary where you brief us at a meeting, actually I find extremely helpful, and something I wish we did more of, that a couple of us go to something and then brief everybody. I feel like it's more efficient use of everybody's time, because then we all get the same information but don't all have to be at the same things at the same time. So thank you for that. I'd love to see us do more of that.
I don't know why I thought of this when Jack was speaking, but the other issue, which may be a Berry Hill issue, was there was a lot of space surrounding where they built this. So if these things are coming on trucks, these trucks need to get somewhere, drop this stuff off, put them on these little tanks, I think you described them as tanks, and move it into place, and then move the next piece into place, and then the next piece into place, which seems feasible in a lot of our areas of need, but then again, not feasible at others. So it was helpful to see it, and obviously if anyone has questions, I'll answer it, but I think we should see a more, I'm not going to come up with other hotel chains. So.
No, we will work with H2M to identify some of their customers and clients, or maybe Elite has some clients that have more upgraded versions of these prefabricated units that might have some better finishes and better exterior finishes that you can look at and see what the facilities director at BOSI is obviously someone I worked with when I was there, and our architects have also said these will be indistinguishable from regular schools if you see them. So I do think it would be helpful to kind of get a sense of the brackets of the market. And it would be helpful, maybe, Ms. Bellato, if you could just talk about some of the challenges of locating something on the Berry Hill site because of the difficulty in getting construction equipment behind the school as it's currently configured, and that's really the thing that's in our way right now.
Sure. We've been exploring different options based on the site constraints and the grade change at that building. So we actually had a pre-manufacturer company come in to do a lunch and learn for us, which was Access Construction, and we talked through our different design approaches with them of how to get a prefab on the site in the same location, and because of the crane and the trucks and all of the different requirements that go into the prefab, the existing location of the portables is not a suitable location to rebuild in. So we need to find another location to build those prefab or new construction in. So we've been looking at the different changes in grades and where we can accommodate that. We believe there's still some investigation to be done on that.
One of the fun things about Berry Hill is the hill, except it's not fun from a construction perspective. It's great for sledding, not so good for construction.
All right. Thank you. Dr. Park had a question?
For the other prefab buildings, if we could take a look at something that's a little older instead of something that's brand new, that will be helpful.
Sure, we'll look at that.
Thank you. Anyone else has questions for Dr. Rogers or the construction company? Okay. All right. So thank you, Mr. Greco, for reporting to the board. Right now, we move on to audience to public. You must be a resident in order to come to the podium and address the board. So we ask that you state your name. There's a lock at the podium. Please put your name and address when you come up. And in addition, you'll have 4 minutes to speak initially. At the end of the 4 minutes, I'll ask you to take a seat first, and after everyone in the audience has a chance to speak once, you may come up to the audience for the second time again. We don't allow the speaking of a particular staff or student issue due to privacy law. There's no polling of board members by speakers, and we thank you for respecting the rules and procedures. With that, if anyone wishes to speak, please come up to the podium.
Hi, Danielle Sanjabi, 9 Elm Street. I have 3 children going into Walt Whitman. So my question is, and I thank you all for being here and dedicating all your time, doing all your hard work. What is the student per class size that we like to see within our district? I know state numbers are different. on the elementary school building level. I ask this because I'm going to have 3 students at Walt Whitman. My other question is, will we have more dedicated space for our special services like occupational therapy and physical therapy that are non-distracting spaces? Because we unfortunately didn't have those dedicated spaces in prior years. And just a comment about a program that I have seen in another district, which was Space Maker. It is a program given during recess, and it gives students the opportunity to have a more structured activity. So the kids are out in recess willing to play or wanting to play, but those who don't really have that, have somewhere to go, a teacher for each building. This is adopted in other districts, just so they have a more structured activity during those recess hours if they choose to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else would like to speak?
I'm way out of my comfort zone with this, not a public speaker. Good evening, Dr. Rogers, Central Administration, and members of the Board of Education. My name is Leslie Schletthoff. I live at 19 High Street. My children are entering the 8th and 10th grades at Syosset High School, at HBT and Syosset High School, respectively. I'd like to discuss a topic that has been living rent-free in my head since the end of June, which is graduation gowns. Clearly, this does not impact my children just yet, nor is it of high priority at this time in comparison to all that everybody is working on right now. But the topic deserves a modicum of attention before they graduate in 2026 and 2028. Currently, norms regarding gender and gender identification are both ever-present and ever-changing. All students in Syosset are supported by staff, club offerings, and open discussions about gender identity should they choose to participate. We have become increasingly inclusive, and this is something for us as educators and parents to be very proud of. However, I'm left to wonder why Syosset continues to identify males and females at graduation by using different color caps and gowns for their genders. I understand that many, if not most, school districts have 2 official colors with one in dominance on logos, sports gear, and all kinds of swag, not just one color. Syosset High School graduating females wear white gowns while the males wear red gowns. I would imagine that if someone chose to wear a gown of the opposite gender they were assigned at birth, that they wouldn't get much pushback and be allowed to do so. At least I'd like to think so, given current climate and inclusion. But there are a few ideas about this that I think are worthy of a conversation. As per Syosset, the idea that female high school graduates are expected or encouraged to wear white as they move on to life as an adult is archaic to me. The color white is often a symbolic of purity and virtue, not for males as it is for females. Relegating a female to a color that represents purity and innocence is quite honestly a sexist idea, unless the boys wear it too. There is a reason why tradition has brides wearing white, and only a few go rogue and challenge that tradition every now and again. And perhaps my thoughts and ideas are rogue as well. A few solutions perhaps. At first I thought, why not allow students to choose which of the 2 colors they prefer to wear if that school uses 2? Why not give kids a choice rather than deciding for them? But here lies the problem. Whether a student identifies with their assigned gender at birth or not, should they decide to wear a gown of a different color than assigned tradition, they may be subject to ridicule or bullying with their peers, making assumptions about who they are. Kids can be cruel regardless of how evolved we like to think they have become. I'm sure that nobody wants their child to experience that at the culminating event of their high school experience. Another suggestion, or why doesn't Syosset choose one color for both genders to wear? For me, I look horrid in white. Despite having spent all summer outside, I still look washed out, and wearing white would not be my friend. I wore a white gown when I graduated from Herrick's High School in 1988, while the boys wore blue. I'd have preferred a blue gown if given a choice. Herrick's graduates wear only blue now. I would also choose a red gown now if I was a Syosset graduate like my husband was in 1988. He wore blue and the girls wore white. It has been 35 years since he graduated. Syosset can do better. Please consider unifying future classes with one color graduation gown. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to come up to speak?
Hello, my name is Tony Gagliano, 2 Split Rock Lane in Syosset, obviously. I'm here to talk about the boys hockey team. We've been a club team for about 38 years now. My father started it, or was one of the founding fathers. And it was his hope that someday it would become a varsity sport and get some funding from the school. And we are a club, and we've been funding ourselves, and the ice and the ref and the league fees have been going, it's extraordinary right now, as you can see with all the prices. So we wanted to know if, like the crew team, who's also a club, they got some funding for their sport, and we want to know if we would be able to be, or eligible to get the same kind of respect for our sport. We did win a state championship this year. First time, I think, in Syosset history. I was pretty proud of the boys. They love playing in front of the fans, in front of their, schoolmates, and it's the most fun they ever have playing hockey. Most of the kids play travel hockey, and it costs from $5,000 to $12,000 a year, and that doesn't include travel, hotels. So when we started, I think my son was on the team in 8th grade. It was about $1,000 for the club team, and now it's about $2,000, and that's with the discount for being a travel player. And it's becoming extremely hard for us to pay for the ice, the refs, the leagues, just for something to be enjoyable for the kids, because honestly, they really love playing in front of the fans. So we were just here to see if maybe you could give us some funding like the crew team that's also a club, or maybe make it a varsity sport and recognize us and help us with the funding. We obviously all pay for our own equipment, so that wouldn't be a problem because they all play for other teams. So we just want you to take it under advisement maybe and think of what you could do and help the team out. All right? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else who wishes to speak? All right. So that closes the audience to public.
So I'll take the first two, and then I think I'll defer to the board on the latter. So the first one, Ms. Sanjabi, I'm going to ask Dr. Curry to spend a couple of seconds. She's certainly looked at some of the space planning as we're going into the fall, and has done a lot of work on space planning at Walt Whitman, and so she might have an update that she could share with yourself and with the board.
Absolutely, thank you. In working closely not only with Mr. Snyder from Walt Whitman, but all of our elementary principals, we spent a lot of time this summer taking a look at the spaces that were available, and I am happy to report that we were very successful with our OT, PT, speech, and ENL services. We were successful in securing both dedicated and designated spaces that are appropriate for these services being provided. So that was something we were very happy to be able to put in place. As far as our class sizes on the elementary go, our kindergarten class sizes, we look to have no more than 22 students in our kindergarten classes. For grades 1, 2, and 3, the class sizes do not go higher than 25 students. And for grades 4 and 5, that maximum number of students in the class is 27. And again, those class sizes are consistent across all 7 of our elementary schools. And regarding the opportunities during recess time for students to participate in, whether we call it a makerspace or some type of alternative activity to the outdoor play, we actually do have an opportunity to balance both the indoor and the outdoor activities, especially as the nicer days turn to somewhat more inclement days as fall turns into winter and so on. So our teachers, along with our school monitors, have really put together nice programs with the help of our library media specialists also, that students will have the opportunity to do a lot of indoor activities as well. But while the days are nice, we do look to maximize their chances to get outdoors in the fresh air as well. Thank you.
Ms. Schlenoff, thank you for your comment about graduation. It certainly occurred to me that we have 2 different colored gowns, and that at some point someone might have some thoughts about the subject, but this is yours are the comments of first impression, so I certainly appreciate you sharing them. I'll have a conversation with the high school staff to see if they have any reactions to it. But to date, this is the first time I've heard a concern expressed about it, but I will certainly reflect on what you've shared with us. And Mr. Gagliano, I know that when the crew team came to the board and asked for the board's consideration, the first question the board asked me was to prepare some information for them so that they were better educated on the subject. I suspect, Ms. Chang, you would like me to do the same thing again. So I will take a homework assignment away from this event and get back to the board with some information so that you can be better informed to make a decision.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers, and congratulations to the hockey team for winning the New York State Championship too. This is a great accolade to achieve. Congratulations. Okay, there's one unfinished business item, and that's the selection of NYSBA annual business meeting voting delegate. The board needs a voting delegate to participate in the virtual NYSBA business meeting on Monday, October 16th at 4 p.m. The board member must attend a voting delegate orientation on October 5th at noon or October 11th at 4 p.m. or view the recording. So may I have a volunteer, please, for this? Okay, Mr. Greco? No, one second.
So I'm happy to volunteer. The only issue I worry about is the meeting itself is a Monday during business hours, so I would do it as long as I had sort of a backup delegate in case something came up and I wasn't able to do it during the day.
Anyone who would like to be the backup for Mr. Greco for this event?
I know, I'm captain backup. Okay, that's fine. I'll do it. You said it's during the business day? So it's at the close? Okay.
This is a great example for divide and conquer. Thank you, Mr. Ostrich. All right, so
I don't know what the propriety of this is, but one of the things that came up during audience of the public sort of piqued my interest, and I had a question. If I'm out of order, just let me know. Otherwise,
from the questions they raised at the audience to public. Okay.
So the question was regarding recess, and so it's one of those interesting things that I don't think I fully understand, and I'm not sure, based on the feedback that I get frequently, that folks across the district totally understand. How is recess structured? Is it organized differently by building? Is there a central administration sort of directive or organizing principle about whether or not activities should be organized, or the principals sort of have free reign? Who is responsible for administering it? Have we sort of gotten, I mean, it's an area where I get questions and concerns and feedback with some frequency, so it's actually a good opportunity, I think, for us to sort of speak a little bit more about it.
Right. We do a lot of training with the monitors who supervise the recess. The building principals talk about this at their elementary principals meeting with some frequency. There are inconsistencies because humans are inconsistent, although the district's expectations are alike for all. And some monitors, of course, are more experienced than others, and so they have, there is variety, but the goals are the same for all. Dr. Curry works with the elementary principals. The HR department has arranged the trainings for the monitors. And maybe you could talk in just a little bit more detail about how we do that. And if that level of detail doesn't sate your curiosity, we can come back with something a little bit more elaborate at a future meeting.
Sure.
Recess in general, what we strive to do is to provide opportunities that there's something for every student to connect to. Again, when we can, we like to have the opportunity to be outside. If there are situations that would be detrimental or prevent a child from enjoying the outside, we certainly provide indoor activities, whether they're board games, silent reading, small games where they can work with a friend or so on. But for the most part, the philosophy is that if the days are appropriate weather-wise to be outside, we like to encourage the students to do that. The opportunities outside also vary. There's both structured and unstructured play. Please don't confuse that with supervised and unsupervised. The students are always supervised, and we do spend quite some time with our monitor team talking about how to properly supervise, intervening when necessary to guide and redirect play so that the students are all enjoying themselves and that every student has a place to belong. And some cases, students are eager to go out and venture out on their own, whether they're on the swings, on the slide, and playing on the various apparatus outside. And other times there's actually structured gameplay going on, whether it's in the Gaga pit, Foursquare, and all of the other games that the kids do enjoy playing. And in that case, the buildings have strategically chosen monitors that would be more adept in monitoring and supervising that type of play, because that can also tend to lead to a little bit more competition out on the field, and we want to make sure that that stays healthy and happy for all the students. We also train the monitors in what we like to reference as PBIS Light. It's positive behavior interventions and supports that give the monitors a skill set in order to be proactive in redirecting student energies in a positive direction and hopefully avoiding any type of negative interaction out there. We've also done a lot of work this summer in the realm of anti-bullying work, that as we begin to roll it out this fall to our staff, then that would include our monitors, teacher aides, and teacher assistants, talking more about the interventions and the role adults play in helping guide students towards enjoying their time outside and using their energies in a positive light and enjoying time with their peers. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Ostrick and Mr. Greco for representing the board to be the voting delegate. Backup. Mr. Ostrick's the backup. Okay. Team backup. There we go. All right. The following is new business, 8 items. A1 and A2 can be taken together. They're the approval of staff changes in 2023 and 2024 stipends and hourly rates. May I have a motion, please? Dr. Park, seconded by Ms. Abramson. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? A2 is the approval of coaching recommendations for 2023. May I have a motion, please? Mr. Greco, seconded by Ms. Falco. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? B items. B1 is the approval of Committee on Special Education recommendations. May I have a motion, please? Dr. Park, seconded by Ms. Koshia. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? B2 is the approval of Committee on Preschool Special Education recommendations. May I have a motion, please? Mr. Greco, seconded by Ms. Levitin. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? B3 is the approval of a settlement agreement and release. May I have a motion, please? Ms. Abramson, seconded by Ms. Koshia. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? B4 is the approval of the district-wide school safety plan. May I have a motion, please? Ms. Falco, seconded by Mr. Greco. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? B5 is the second reading of the policy purchasing. May I have a motion, please? Dr. Park, seconded by Ms. Koshia. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? B6 is the authorization of appointments. May I have a motion, please? Mr. Greco, seconded by Ms. Falco. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C items. C1 is the authorization of service contracts. May I have a motion, please? Ms. Abramson, seconded by Ms. Koshia. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C2 is the authorization for special education and nursing contracts. May I have a motion, please? Ms. Levitin, seconded by Ms. Falco. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C3 is the authorization for contracts with Nassau BOCES for services for the 2023-2024 school year and final authorization for the 2022 and 2023 school year. May I have a motion, please? Dr. Parr, seconded by Ms. Koshia. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C4 is the approval of the award of Nassau County Director of School Facilities Purchasing Consortium Cooperative Bids 2023-2024. May I have a motion, please? Ms. Falco, seconded by Mr. Greco. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C5 is the approval of the award of bids. May I have a motion, please? Dr. Parr, seconded by Ms. Koshia. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C6 is the authorization of the disposal of broken, surplus, and/or obsolete equipment and/or books. May I have a motion, please? Ms. Levitin, seconded by Mr. Greco. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Member motion to adjourn the meeting. Okay, Ms. Abramson and Dr. Parr, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your summer. We'll see you back in September. Thank you.